Welcome to the Villanova University Center for Irish Studies podcast. My name is Joseph Lennon, and I am the Emily C. Riley Director of the Center and host of this podcast series. Villanova's connections to Ireland extend back to its founding and continue to this day. We offer a major and a minor in Irish Studies and have 6 study abroad programs to Ireland. We teach in 8 disciplines and host distinguished visitors to campus. This podcast aims to share some of our conversations and expand the bounds of our community beyond campus. Thank you, and feel free to share.
Well, hello. My name is Bess Rowen, and I am an assistant professor of theater here at Villanova University and a member of the Irish Studies Steering Committee. And I am joined today by Dan Colley, who is the writer of Lost Lear, which is coming to the John and Joan Mullen Center for the Performing Arts later this week. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Bess. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm thrilled to be here. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, welcome. Is this your first time to the Philadelphia area?
Yeah, it is. It is. And what a time to arrive.
Yes.
We got off a flight, and the next thing we're doing is looking for somewhere to watch the Super Bowl.
Fantastic. And then, yes, to have a welcome parade for your arrival is not something that everyone gets. This is very true.
It isn't. We're taking it very personally.
Good.
We've made ourselves the main characters of this story.
As you should be, quite frankly. Wonderful. Well, we're so glad that it's a particularly auspicious time to be in the city of brotherly love.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you a bit as way of introduction to some folks who might not know as much about your career. If you could tell me a little bit about how and why the theater, right? How did you come to be a theater person and a theater maker? I always think that's an interesting journey.
Yeah, good question. I mean, the truth is I've always done it. Like I was a kid actor. My first professional job was when I was 10. I was the boy in the Gates production of Waiting for Godot. You say Godot, or you say Godot.
I know, it's okay.
Yeah, it's all right.
Don't worry about our mispronunciation.
And that was quite an experience because that was a regularly touring show. First outing was to Toronto, to the World Stage Festival, and then we were in the Barbican in London, and then we did a big tour of US universities, actually. Unfortunately, not taking in Villanova at that time.
Next time.
Yeah, I might have to pick a different role next time.
No. I think you should have the same role. No discussion about it.
But that was, quite an education for a 10, 11-year-old. It was really something. And, so it was sort of part of my sort of like extra school life, almost like I had like a nighttime life as a child and a teenager, in various gigs and doing different shows, and I would get cast as the boy in the various things that they needed in the gate or whatever,
Sure.
But after a while, as I was sort of getting into my teenage years and becoming really interested in film in the way that like you can get really passionate about film in your adolescent. I mean, that feels like that's film and music is a real time when those things start to enliven and sort of click in place for you. I thought I really would like to sort of be behind the scenes. I'd love to be able to sort of be interested to sort of help things happen on screen or on stage. But I went to university and I studied something really adjacent. I did English and philosophy in Galway, and this was before they set up the remarkable theatre department that's there at the moment, but this is before they had one. It really was just a part of the English department. And by the end of that time, I started hearing this word dramaturg, sort of impressive sounding German sounding word that we hadn't had much of in Ireland before. But you were there in 2010, right? Or 2008?
2008, yeah.
So by the time I was graduating from college in like 2009 and then looking for work in Dublin in 2010, the kind of crash had happened.
Yes.
And this sort of like amazing sort of like 10, 15 years of like Irish economic growth, along with like state investment in various, we should have invested more in infrastructure, of course. But anyway, we did build a bunch of theatres and there was like an amazing time for the arts. That was cut really quite severely. There was also a bunch of people who had no jobs, and some of them were recent graduates and were making theatre. And so there was a lot of people around making work on the dole, cheap rent, And the Germans had arrived, as in like German influence had arrived.
Sure.
Dramaturgy was something that was in the air, and people were less interested in dramatic theatre as such, which Ireland has like a reputation for,
Yes.
you know, like playwright-led through several generations of them. This turned out to be more about sort of piecing things together from documentary, from interviews with experts, from social media, from pop culture, from whatever it is, and stitching it together while the performers often use their own names. There's a bit of a cliche that, you know, every show in Dublin had to have a downstage right microphone, you know.
Fair enough.
In that time, and it was a very kind of heady time to kind of come into a theatre milieu. You know, there was nothing, and also there was a lot of people who were trying to make something out of nothing.
Yeah.
And anyway, I decided to sort of place myself as a dramaturg, not quite knowing what that means, but it was handy because nobody else knew what it meant either. So we could make it up as we went along. And in that time, I became very interested in basically playwright specific ways of creating material, that you would try and find other ways of making material that wasn't so literary, I suppose. In retrospect, I realized that's probably like a neurodivergent workaround I was doing for myself, right? I realized like I'm not all that good at like sitting down and like creating a great work of literature between me and the page that's going to go on stage. And in fact, I trained then as a youth theatre facilitator. Right. So with the National Association of Youth Theatre, they had a year-long course, which was wonderful. And they taught me how to get a workshop going, how to get young people specifically, but actually it applies to anybody, how to get them out of their heads and making things, getting creative and collaborating. And it was just like, if anything, it was like a crash course in a series of like exercises to get creative juices going. Wow. And so basically I started using that as my practice thereafter, as a kind of a way of like starting work. And that's long sort of story short, I suppose that's where we come to making something like Lost Lear. But
that is a wonderful journey. I have so many questions. So I do want to go back slightly because I really want to know what you remember about being the boy in Waiting for Godot.
Yeah.
Because I'm curious, like, had you seen a lot of theater before that? Or were you just kind of stepping in and like, what did you understand about what was happening?
No, I hadn't really seen a lot of theatre before that. I'd spoken to the previous boy who had aged out of the role. And he gave me a good coaching in saying what they're looking for is for you to like be expressionless, just to say the words.
Yeah.
And I realize now in retrospect that, you know, a little blonde boy coming on stage at some point and saying that, you know, your savior's not coming.
Right.
Has a certain effect on it, you know, has
For
a certain
sure.
effect on the stage, and realize that was going on. But honestly, like even at age 10, the kind of like bizarre humor of it, the sort of strange bleakness that also is cut through with like genuine gags, like real gags, like just got me thinking, just really got me going. And I think even now, you know, I'm really drawn to, as an adult, reading, you know, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and then later adapting one of his short stories, A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings. That sense that not everything is explained in the words, or in the staging necessarily, and leaves lots of room for suggestion and beats that the audience fill in about the world around it, and that being so much more rich and haunting than anything you could try to do to pin it down. And so that's the thing I got from. I mean, it like I wouldn't have had those words aged 10.
You sure?
But I think it formed a kind of a taste, I think. Even though I'm not that interested in doing Beckett or Beckettian work really, but I think those things really stuck with me.
That is so interesting. I write about stage direction, so I'm always thinking about the moments in between and the in-betweenness of how, you know, the way that humanity is injected into these other kinds of communications that are nonverbal.
Absolutely.
And when we were talking, you were talking about that time, you know, right post 2008 when I was there and like leading into, you know, the recession and things like that were happening. One of the things that struck me about Irish theater at that moment, there was kind of a flashpoint, I feel like, as you had said, you know, that there was a very text-based tradition in Ireland, and then there became a really embodied tradition in Ireland, and that like somehow the body on stage can be stronger than the words. I feel like I was right there when that kind of shift was happening, and it's making me think of what you're talking about, that the thing that's interesting is the not knowing and the things not being fully explained.
Yeah.
So I love that. And I did notice that you had that adaptation of the Marquez short story, and that you had a lot of work that you had done for children's theater. And so it makes sense, but I was wondering if you were kind of also thinking there about being an audience member as a child. But I guess maybe you're trying to create the next, generation of people who are interested in making theater.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. That is a nice way of putting it. I mean, once I was 10 and was in those things, I started seeing a lot of shows, stuff that would be in Dublin,
Sure.
My parents were great. I mean, they had to be great. I mean, imagine taking this kid around America for 6 weeks, you think about what that would cost them,
Sure.
Anyway, and so I would have seen a lot of theater then after that. But I think that is interesting, thinking about the audience and the young audience. I mean, one of the things that there's a lot of talk when you're making theater for young audiences correctly about age ranges.
Yes.
And the younger you get, the narrower the bands get because of how rapidly people develop.
Sure.
So like 0 to like 6 months is its own age.
Of course.
6 months on to 18 months is its own age group. And so I'm realizing that you have to think a lot about audience in that way, and you also have to include the voice of the child in testing the thing as well, and that's an important part of it. However, I think deep down I really am just making a show that I want to see.
Yeah.
Not even the 8-year-old me wants to see, like actually the 8-year-old maybe that lives in me today
Sure.
wants to see. And then it kind of becomes a question of like, who else can be in the audience with me, Because I can't, and every time I think about audience, or what audience are you trying to reach, what audience are you trying to, you're often asked that in kind of the context of marketing, I suppose.
Sure.
But actually it's not just marketing, it is also like the kind of creative practice of programming. Think about who your show is for.
Yeah.
That is important. Ultimately, my best answer has just been like, it's just, I have something and it's sort of in my head. It's a kind of a vibe and nobody else seems to be making it. So I need to do it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I am also wondering if a youth audience is perhaps the best at what you're describing of like the okayness with not having an answer.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes adults or the adult part of ourselves like really wants a yes or a no, or like what happened, what is going on. Very kind of plot driven in that sense. And I think children are more open to the wonder, and the childhood parts of us are maybe also more open to the wonder and the ambiguity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because, I mean, when you're 8, I mean, it's different for different people, but when you're 8, I suppose, you are sort of testing the edges of reality quite a bit, You're sort of like, okay, which bits are real and which bits aren't. That starts to become kind of interesting to people at around that stage of development. And I'm really interested in complicating that for them.
You're like, I'm here to push that with you.
Yeah. If we could just keep the world a bit more enchanted a bit longer, that would be great.
Goodness, yes. That is a goal always, I think. And maybe that leads us into a discussion of Lost Lear, which also is about sort of the testing those boundaries of the reality.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you came to have this idea and kind of what was the process of bringing this right here to Villanova?
Yeah. My grandmother lived with dementia at the end of her life, and she lived in a nursing home, and it was a very standard nursing home you would see probably anywhere in the Western world. But one section of it, one bit of the corridor, just had a kind of a full-sized set.
Seriously?
Yeah, of like an Irish mid-century town.
Wow.
Just like 3 or 4 like shop fronts, basically. Like a post office, a little shop, a little pub, and the hairdresser, I think, was where they got their hair done.
Wow.
And I was like, what is that about? So when I looked into it, I realized it's part of a whole movement of care design.
Yeah.
Not just spatial design, although that is important, but care design in general, which is about not trying to orient people to our reality, but trying to go with their reality, and that it alleviates various kinds of additional stress and that kind of thing. So, I mean, this was a fairly, I don't know, perfunctory sort of effort at it, but there are entirely immersive mid-century American towns, for example, where the rooms have porches and picket fences, and it's inside, but they have like realistic outdoor lighting, so the corridors look like streets, and there's a square, and so there is a sense in which people's reality is where the designers think it is, basically.
Yeah.
And then I came across something which isn't so design immersive, but there's this method called the speckle method, which asks the carers to identify a particular theme, a thing that their person that they're caring for, where they want to be. And crucially, it should be something that they want, that they did, and that they were good at. And then your job, once you identify that, is to keep them there. And anybody coming into contact with them needs to be a part of that reality in some way. And so it could be anything. It could be playing bridge. It could be it could be like packing up your home. It could be gardening. It could be flying an airplane. The important thing was it was something that they did in their life and that they were good at, and it restores their self-esteem. And the proponents of this method say you alleviate many of the problems we associate with dementia, which is less to do, I suppose, with a kind of, they would say, with a neurofibrary tangles which lead to confusion and paranoia, and more with the impact in the difference between what they understand reality to be and what it is, you know? And so if you alleviate that, then you go with it. But I mean, I spoke to people who cared for people in this method, and they absolutely swore by it. And also some of the methods involved in it, some of the sort of tips they give involved in it were really similar to like theatre improv. It was like,
I'm sure.
It was like, don't ask questions.
Say yes
and, listen, support your partner, all this sort of stuff. I was like, oh, it's quite similar in a way, And then I thought, but like, what about the people who have to say things to them? What about ways in which like you may have like unfinished business and you're coming to the end of somebody's life and you need to bring that to them, but that's not part of their reality. Say you don't even exist in their reality.
Right.
You weren't born.
Right.
In the time in which they're living. And the people I spoke to said, get over it.
Yeah.
That's
it's about
the
their
advice.
comfort,
It's
right?
about their
not
comfort,
yours.
it's about their life. And so for me, that seemed to be a kind of touch upon a bunch of different things for me, right?
Yeah.
It was like the difference between storytelling and reality, how storytelling in some way creates our reality, theatre used in the everyday, right? People acting, right, in order to do something, in order to like make something happen for themselves outside of a theatre context. And also, I suppose, the sense in which it's almost impossible to know what's going on in somebody else's mind. And when dementia's at play, that's more heightened. Yeah. But it's true of everybody, right? It's true even of people with fairly neurostandard or neuro general brains. But so that's where it came from. And then I thought, what if she was an actress? Adding an additional layer to it. And then I thought, what would she be doing? And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if she was doing funny Maria? Funny Maria.
That laugh riot.
Wouldn't it be some crack if she was doing King Lear, which is the kind of canonical, understood as a dementia Shakespeare play.
Sure.
And I wanted the audience to have some experience of it. I wanted us to be inside the experience and for the audience to see it crack. The reality crack when it does for her. It turns out Lear's a really good play. It turns out it's like full of like great family dynamics. It's got this really flawed but loving and also self-loathing guy at the top of it. And then it's a sort of a story of like, how do you come back together? How do you like say the things in order to like forgive each other and be with each other at the end, particularly when different realities are at play? I was like, that is awesome.
Yeah.
But also I was like, Cordelia, his daughter, who is screwed over, who is banished for having done the right thing. I just thought she forgave him too easily. And that if I was to write a character like that, it would be harder.
Yeah.
It would be harder for her to do that. And so that's the situation that people find themselves in when they come into Lost Lear. It's a rehearsal of King Lear. Everything is going well until an estranged son arrives. And they have to find a way for him to be a part of this reality. And the Cordelia role is obvious, but it doesn't quite fit him. So he starts to break this reality a bit. And the breaks is where we get to see, the objective reality, that this person is much older than they think, that this life that she's lived somehow mapped onto King Lear, that they have a kind of an echoes of the relationship of Cordelia and King Lear, and on it goes. So that's as much as I can say now.
Of course, no, we don't know spoilers.
Well, I mean, that is a big fight. I want people to know what it is coming in, but yeah.
That's so interesting. And you're so right what you're saying about, the way that theater maps onto these real life experiences where people have to play along, right, with what's happening.
Yeah.
It's almost a reversal of, the standardized patient role, right, of like people training, actors going in to help train, medical professionals. But it's like, what happens if the medical professionals have to be the people, not that they're training, but that are acting along with the patients? That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm curious, did your opinion of this kind of complicated relationship change at all as you, like, what did you discover in rehearsal? Did it make you feel differently about this technique or this approach? Like, were there any discoveries there?
Yeah, I mean, we went over it for a while. There's a lot of like ethical questions to go into about that. And I am interested in hearing about that, and I dove into them myself and looked at it from different points of view. So the Alzheimer's Society of the UK, for example, does not recommend this as a method. And the small charity that publishes the book and trains people in it, they're quite beleaguered by that. I think it's quite a sort of David and Goliath kind of question around that.
Yeah.
And yet, when I spoke to people about it in Ireland, including the people who cared for people with dementia, a group called the Dementia Carers Campaign Network, and I described it, it seems to fit in with what people do in practice anyway.
Yeah.
And that when you break it down, it does seem to fit into good care, person-centered care. The objection to it is that it's not a rights-based approach, that it doesn't allow for the person with dementia to be who they are.
Yeah.
Or
well, that's tricky, right?
Yeah, that's tricky. But in any case, that's where the debate lies.
Right.
And after going through all that, I was like, hang on, I'm doing a play. I'm doing a play where this is what's going on for this person.
Right.
Right. And this is working for her to a certain extent,
Sure.
but it's not working for her son.
Right.
Drama. Right.
Dramatic
tension. Yeah. Drama.
Scene.
So exactly. Yeah. So actually, I kind of go over and back now watching it myself. Some nights I watch it and I think this is really working for Joy.
Yeah.
Some nights I think this isn't fair on Connor. Other times I think they're kidding themselves that this is working for Joy. Other times I think, that's just the kind of complicated person she is.
Right.
It wouldn't be straightforward no matter what she's doing.
That's the trick, right?
Yeah. So we went through all the kind of ethics of it and then decided to say, this is the situation. Let people make their own ethical judgment.
Well, and again, that's what you were saying before, right? That like there isn't an easy answer.
Yeah.
So sometimes, unfortunately, in life, we have situations that are both good and bad for everyone involved.
Yeah.
And that's kind of up to everyone involved and us to make an ethical consideration of like, does this work for this person in this moment? Is it worth the risk?
Yeah.
I think that's good for the brain because, in life there's rarely a time you make a decision that just benefits everyone and solves something, especially in a situation like that where, I imagine consent is also quite difficult when you've got someone who might be lucid certain moments and then not other moments. Like which part of them is consenting and are they fully aware of what's going on? You can't know, as you're saying, you can't know. So I think that's a really interesting ethical dilemma you've presented with people with. How have the audiences responded? Like, have you had any really interesting responses in terms of how people grapple with this material?
Yeah, we a lot of people I speak to have had some person in their lives with dementia,
Yeah.
and so the sort of experience of that is really about kind of holding space for people with that. You know, not to be too Cynthia Erivo about it.
We're not holding each other's
Yeah,
fingers.
we're not holding each other's fingers. Yeah, you can't see that, but
it's a podcast, but I
exactly. Yeah, and so it does. It brings up stories for people. It brings up memories for people, and often in a really positive way, you know. And sometimes people are like, that's exactly what I did, and now I feel in some way vindicated by it, or there is a sort of sense of like, I just know that wouldn't have been right for my mother, my husband, whatever it might be, and I think. It's amazing how quickly people sort of adjust to the premise of the show, and people then just start to see the situation as it is. People actually don't think that much about the method after a while, in my experience, I think.
Sure.
Although I'd be really interested to hear, because there's a lot of people in Villanova who are studying, storytelling in medicine, storytelling in care.
Yes.
You know, that'll be to the fore of their mind for a lot of it. I'm really interested in talking to them about that.
I'm really excited to hear that too, especially the night that the nursing school is sponsoring. That'll be, I think, really interesting feedback.
Big time.
I assume, although I can't obviously be 100% sure, that a room full of, our students at Villanova Theater are mostly, they study dramaturgy as their basis. So they're going to be very like methodologically focused, and structurally focused, and certainly also storyline focused. But, without that training, I'm curious what the nursing students will think. That's a really interesting combination of folks. And again, theater as this nexus for all of those different groups talking to each other. It's like this is the piece is the facilitator of those conversations, which is a pretty amazing thing. Yeah,
it is great. And it is the thing that that theater can claim and can still claim is that it brings people together in the one room. And it begets conversations.
Yes.
In person, in that kind of meet space. And I think that gives it its unique frisson,
For sure. Yeah, I would agree with you. Switching gears slightly, you made me think of, yes, Lear. Lear's a pretty good play, I guess. I don't know.
As far as plays go.
It's fine. Written by some guy, You're adapting in a certain way, Lear, right? In certain ways, it's not quite an adaptation because but there's also clearly a parallel storyline happening here. And you've adapted, Marquez's short story, which is a different genre. How much does adaptation play into your work? You have original things, but you also have adaptations. When do you make that choice, or does the piece kind of choose you?
Yeah, it's mostly adaptations. Actually, it's mostly what I'm focused on. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, it is. Even when it's so for me, I think. The way I'm working is that I'm sort of drawing in stuff I'm reading and I'm making notes about it. And then if there's a story or a text which can kind of be the basis of it, that's the kind of aha bit. And then it starts to click together. And it's at that point that I can start gathering actors and musician and designers together to do development. And then I've got certain kind of like basically workshop techniques to try and bring out something, to try and take that off the page in first draft form anyway, which allows me to then write, Maria, very bad draft before we go back to it again. And then again, there's another phase of development, some more decisions about the design, some more decisions about the music. And then that's how the show comes about. But I think, I'm always looking for the structure that's going to kind of click in. That's going to hold it together, I suppose, So Lear or or A Very Old Man with Enormous Wings, or I'm working on a piece now by Jorge Luis Borges. It's inspired by it, but almost entirely All the Stories Fallen Away. And it's now just called The Lottery, but it was there to structure. It was there to give us our structure.
Yeah.
But, you know, given having made this decision, there'd be no words in that piece, it would go away. And I'm also now working on a piece that's inspired by not even a narrative piece by Megan O'Giblin called God, Human, Animal, Machine, in which Megan, who had a really, really strong religious faith, was in Moody Bible School before she lost her faith, and then does a kind of a deep dive into science, physics, maths, futurism, technology, in order to try and find a new basis of reality for herself.
Oh, wow.
And in it discovers all of these kind of Christian eschatological echoes in even the most technological sort of work. So so if I can find a text that'll bring it all together, then that's what I'll go with.
Yeah, like a skeleton almost, right?
Basically, yeah.
And then you're kind of fleshing it out literally
on
top of it. But it also sounds like you have a deeply collaborative process.
Yes, yeah.
So you're also being inspired by the people around you. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. It doesn't really happen until there's people in the room, you know? And
it's a good rule for theater, I think sometimes.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It really is, you know? And so it's kind of made on our feet.
Yeah.
In a way, you know, that's the ideal anyway. When it's going well, there's improvisations around the text. That means that the first draft is in space and time, as opposed to this first draft being on the page. So I'm trying to kind of capture the space and time on the page later. You know,
sure.
So if anybody reads a draft of Lost Lear, God love them, it's basically a document of the things that happened in the room that have then been edited in a way that we can then, you know, have a functional rehearsal room and production meetings and that kind of thing. But it's a
later part of the process instead of a jumping off point.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I understand. Well, that makes sense with what you were saying about how you feel the shift from sort of text-based to a different kind of process. And like, maybe that's also part of, you know, your training in theater for youth too. It's like, you know, the text is great and we like words, but the play is also sort of what the playfulness is also sort of what people are responding to in that moment of like that's what's enchanting a lot of times.
Yeah. Enchanting. Good word. Yeah.
Well, I love that. Who are your inspirations? Like, are there, aside from, you know, obviously the text and the people, like, are there other companies or like, they don't even have to just be theater companies, but like, are there people making music or film or other theater that you're like, that's very cool?
Yeah, big time. A really important one is Mike Lee. He was the first person I'd heard of who works without a script. Mike Lee, who's a film director but started in theatre and still does some theatre now. Secrets and Lies is his big one. Happy Go Lucky, Vera Drake.
Yeah.
He did one about Peterloo. You know, anyway, he makes a film every 2 to 5 years or whatever. But he's got a new film out soon, and it's good listening to interviews with him. It's a reminder that like everybody involved has to sign up without knowing what it's going to be, including the financial backers, you know? And even as I've started to get like a bit further on in my career, I'm like, oh yeah, it actually is a bit better if like we have like a text that people know in advance, or if I can say a bit more about it, then it makes things a little bit easier or whatever. But there's Mike Lee, like in his 70s, still saying to like film financiers, they're like, nope, I'm not telling you.
Yeah, it will be something cool.
Back me or go, you know, it'll be something cool, you know. And that is, I mean, that is an amazing process, and I'd love to be in that room someday. Similarly, Simon McBurney in Complicité, English French company, mostly English now, ensemble devised, coming out of the Lecoq School of Physical Theatre, and also are very interested in like adaptations of big texts as well. You know, The Master and Margarita was a more recent one. They had their old show Mnemonic, which was revived in the National Theatre recently after 25 years. And it was amazing to see where it was that they had come from. The big thing for me was their show The Encounter, which turned out to be a
I saw The
You saw The
Encounter.
Encounter. I think it had a Broadway run as well.
I saw it on Broadway.
Wow, a most unlikely Broadway show.
Indeed. A unique Broadway show.
Yeah.
I've never seen another, or heard, I guess, another Broadway show like that.
Yes, I think that was what they call a limited run.
Yeah.
A limited engagement. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. So that kind of merging of, I suppose, really, I like quite philosophical ideas about the nature of consciousness and ethics about interaction between people, finding their dramatic interactions between humans, character humans, but that really sort of exposes and is interested in the mechanics of theatre, draws you in with complicity. Yeah, right?
Truly, you as an audience member are complicit.
You are. And he has this great thing that he says that I say all the time, which is 90% of the work is done by the audience.
Absolutely. Yeah. And The Encounter is a really great example of that. Yeah. For sure. Yeah. For those who are not familiar with The Encounter, it was a play on Broadway. When I saw it, you were handed a set of headphones, and then really the speakers were like the physical auditory speakers on stage, not people speakers, were the things that were mostly acting. And there was a single storyteller who was telling you, but then there were other parts of the story that came alive via audio only. But because you're wearing headphones, you feel like you're having a personal listening experience that involves your entire body. And it's in a group of people, but it's also just your experience, which is really astonishing. And was was completely unique. I've never seen another thing like that. Yeah. Although, I do think it inspired a few other works that were sort of auditory only, especially coming out of COVID. People were really into how can we get people in a room with masks who are far enough away?
To feel immersed.
And it does, I do think it does immerse you. But it is interesting that these are very creative ways of storytelling. And again, collaborating with the audience and making the audience not just be passive, like kind of receiving the story, but like feeling the story literally in your body, which was amazing. That's so cool. I can see those. I can see why you like those as means of influences there. And you've already said a little bit about this, but like, what's next? So you're working on these two pieces. Yeah. How are those going? How far in process are you in those? Yeah.
Well, the lottery goes into rehearsal in 3 weeks, 4 weeks time, 5 weeks time.
5 weeks time. Okay, you give a
that
little
was quite
bit
an expansion. And that is going to be previewed at the Riverbank Arts Centre, who are my co-producers, and also where I have a residency in Kildare in Ireland, and then that'll give us some time then to make some changes and then mount at the Dublin Theatre Festival in September and October. Fabulous. Which I probably shouldn't have said. That hasn't been announced yet. This isn't live, right?
No, we're not being recorded. What do you mean?
Yes. So I'm really excited about that. That's a piece for young audiences, I think. But in that way, I'm ambivalent about.
Sure.
I'm the audience first.
Right. I understand.
I welcome anybody who finds the 8-year-old in them to come and see it.
But also 8-year-olds.
Yeah. That's really quite clowny. In fact, it's got no words in it, and it really does like to invite the complicity of the audience, and it's, like I say, inspired by the world of Jorge Luis Borges, in which the creators of this, the two clown characters, are trying to make something out of nothing. They're trying to make it with the audience's intention, which is something all theatre does.
You're right.
But
sure.
this is a story about making it explicit. They're
it's like a distillation of that.
A tech lab almost. Yeah. As if they could. They're trying to do it to get rich, but I don't think they will.
You're also sort of returning to Beckett there a little bit,
right?
Yeah,
definitely.
Some clown. There's some act without words in there. It sounds like
there's a banana skin. Yeah.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah, I know, right? And then the other is like I said, it's an adaptation of Megan O'Giblin's God, Human, Animal, Machine, and just the week before this week I was working with actors on it, and then I've got to write them a draft, and then we're going to do another week of work at the National Theatre Studio in the UK and do a little work in progress of that, but that won't see light until 26, 27, that kind of timeline.
Gotcha. So you're
Yeah.
like beginning stages of workshopping.
Exactly. Yeah.
But you're
exactly.
feeding in the next process as you're.
Yeah.
I see what you're doing.
Yeah. It's nice. I mean, I think the kind of ideal, if we can kind of get it going, and we've been really lucky with it the last little while, is to have, the sort of the work like Lost Lear and The Very Old Man with Enormous Wings still
Yes.
touring.
Sure.
Keeping people employed
Like
and
in
getting
rep,
to meet
yeah.
audiences, and then at the same time trying to slip in the new work alongside it. So
Sure.
when that works, when that can line up, that's really sweet. But,
Yeah, that sounds excellent. Is there a lot of overlap in terms of your performers for those pieces? It's
Yeah.
like you have a pretty solid set of collaborators that
Yeah.
you use.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Any like this might be scooping, I guess, but any thoughts for what might happen after that? Is there something else you want to work on that you're kind of
After 27?
what are you doing in 2040?
Yeah, good question.
Yeah.
I read a piece this morning about how the long 19th century finished in 1914.
Yeah.
It's debatable when the long 20th century finished,
Yeah.
but it's certainly over now.
Yes. Agreed.
So it's tough to make long-term plans.
It is indeed.
We are in an epochal change.
We certainly
and
are.
that is that's very challenging and
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. And also, I mean, of course, it sounds like you're also naturally influenced by what's happening around you. So it's hard to kind of guess
Yeah.
where the next thing will, lead you in terms of
Yeah.
inspiration.
Yeah.
That's very fair. Is there anything else you want people to know ahead of coming to see Lost Lear?
Ooh, what do I want people to know? Yeah, I suppose I want them to know that it's funny.
That's so real. Well, you were talking about Godot before, and I was like, yeah, that's a thing I think sometimes in American audiences are like, wait, are we supposed to laugh? And it's like, it's very funny. It's also depressing, but it's very funny.
Yeah. I think people. The word dementia can create a certain atmosphere sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think people who've also cared for people with dementia can know the kind of amazing, bizarre places it can take you to.
Yes.
And that's not always dark either.
No. And we've got to laugh.
Yeah,
We've gotta
absolutely,
laugh. Yeah.
absolutely, and it's in there, I suppose.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Well, good.
Yeah.
I feel like that's an excellent point for us to end on. Thank you so much, Dan, for talking with me, and I cannot wait to see what responses you get this week from all sorts of great performances.
Thanks, Bess. It's been great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.